last episode of History Traveler, we visited the area of Guadalcanal connected with John Basilone and the Battle of Henderson Field. During the Battle of Henderson Field, the Japanese 230th Regiment under the command of Colonel Shoji, which made up the right wing of the attack, never really became engaged in the battle. After the conclusion of the battle on October the 26th, Shoji's detachment would start making their way east toward Koli to link up with reinforcements that were supposed to be heading their way. Meanwhile, the badly mauled Japanese 2nd Division under General Murayama began a retreat west through the jungles of Guadalcanal. As this was happening, U.S. forces immediately began repairing Henderson Field, which had received heavy damage during the battle. Also during this time, another airstrip that became known as Fighter II was constructed. To keep pressure on the Japanese, General Vandegrift ordered the 5th Marines under Colonel Edson, along with a scout sniper detachment known as the Whaling Group, to push west across the Guadalcanal with the intent of pushing the Japanese out of artillery range and cutting off the retreating Japanese 2nd Division. As this renewed offensive was kicking off on November the 1st, American intelligence intercepted a radio message that the Japanese were planning to land reinforcements to the east of Koli on the night of November the 2nd. To contain this threat, the 2nd Battalion of the 7th Marine Regiment under Lieutenant Colonel Hannikin set out toward Koli. By nightfall, his battalion had made it across the Metapona River and had settled in just off the beach, just in time to witness the arrival of Japanese boats. At dawn, an 8-man patrol that stumbled into the Marine position kicked off a firefight that brought in a larger Japanese force, which led to Hannikin, who had lost radio contact with headquarters, to withdraw back to the western bank of the Nalimbu River. To help reinforce the 2nd Battalion, the 164th Regiment and the 1st Battalion of the 7th Marine Regiment under Chesty Puller would join Hannikin's battalion on November the 4th. By November the 7th, this combined Army and Marine element had crossed the Nalimbu River and began moving east to take on the Shoji Detachment, which by now had dug in along Gavaga Creek by the village of Tatere. Just to the east of a place called Koli Point here on Guadalcanal. And there's a pretty big battle that took place here that's kind of lesser known compared to like Bloody Ridge and Alligator Creek and some of the others. After the Battle of Henderson Field, as I mentioned earlier, the 230th under Shoji had made their way up to this area, a little bit more to the west of where I am now. And General Vandegrift of the 1st Marine Division had received intelligence that the Japanese were planning a division-size landing right here along these beaches, and that was a threat that could not be ignored. So up ahead of me is the mouth of Gavaga Creek, and the plan for the Allied forces here, the American forces, was that there were going to be a couple battalions of Marines that were going to be coming up kind of along the coast, also making amphibious landings. And over land were going to be a couple of battalions from the 164th Infantry Regiment, from the Army Americal Division. And the idea was to push back the Japanese and neutralize any threat that might be happening here. So from Koli Point, the Japanese got pushed back over to this area, and they got trapped in a pocket just right over here on the other side of this little patch of water. And coming along this coastal track was going to be the 1st Battalion of the 7th Marines led by Chesty Puller. And right up ahead of me in that little line of trees is going to be the place where Chesty Puller would receive his only wound in his 38-year career.
Here we are at Guadalcanal Creek. Now, this area was important in the Battle of Koli Point. It's also important involving Lieutenant Colonel Chesty Puller. So, in his 38-year combat career, Puller was never wounded. Lots of near misses, but he was never wounded until the 8th of November, 1942. It was at the other side of Guadalcanal Creek, which is right behind me now. So Puller was moving in his battalion. They were advancing upon the Japanese pocket. Advancing with his command group, he's in the thick jungle. He needed a better look. So he said, I'll step out onto the beach. So with his command group, you can imagine his radio operators, antennas, a few, they're probably clumped together to hang around Puller. They stepped out onto the beach, which provided a targeted opportunity for a Japanese 75 millimeter firing a direct shot into Puller's command group. Well, the round landed. I think it killed a few and wounded a number of people, including Puller, who had severely wounded with shrapnel, mainly to his legs and groin and to his arms. So Puller wanted to take command and establish the situation and control that 75 millimeter. So they had some US 75 millimeters in artillery support. So he had to establish communications. So he looked, his field phone wire was broken, his comms operator was wounded. So Puller crawled out, repaired the line himself, and advanced back and called in accurate artillery fire, which suppressed the Japanese fire. Puller was ordered to, or recommended, no one orders Pullers around really in his own battalion. A corpsman came up to him, filled out a casualty tag. I think he said words to effect, you know where you can stick that tag, wrap it around a medicine bottle, or words to that effect. Puller said, I'm staying with my men. You know, I'm not that bad, just find me a hole. So they found Puller a hole to stay in, and for that night, he maintained control. So next morning came, Puller couldn't walk. He was stiff, his wounds were really bothering him. So he radioed back to division. I need someone to properly relieve me, because at the time he only had junior captains in his battalion. So that was one of the reasons he stayed, he remained, because no one could replace him. Anyway, they sent a major up to replace him, had a stretcher, and Puller said, well, I'm not going in a stretcher on a landing craft, I'll walk in front of my men. So he's walked in, or hobbled in, I would say, in the landing craft. They took him back to Lunga perimeter, put him in the hospital, took out a number of smaller pieces of shrapnel. There was one piece of shrapnel deep into his thigh, near his femur. They said, look, Colonel, we're going to send you on an aerial transport to New Caledonia to cut it out. And in the book he wrote with Burke Davis, the words was, apparently he said was, when I was a little boy in Virginia, there was a lot of old Confederate veterans getting around with Yankee lead in them. So if they can survive, I can survive. They said, fair enough, whatever, Colonel Puller. So he remained here until his battalion left a month and a half later. That wound did come back to haunt him in Peleliu, and it was factored in on how his performance was on Peleliu, because his legs swelled up half the size, and he had a bad infection from that. So as soon as he evacuated with his regiment, or what was left of his regiment, after Peleliu, it did emergency surgery on the ship back to Pavuvu. So this was the only place Puller was ever wounded in his combat career. A very less known place, a lot of people don't know about, but very important in the Guadalcanal campaign.
So while all of this is going on with Puller, the Marines and the Army basically surrounded the Japanese in a pocket just to 200-300 yards from me right here. And unfortunately, in the nighttime, the southern part of that pocket wasn't able to link up, and a large element of Shoji's regiment was able to escape. There were quite a few Japanese who were killed right there in the pocket, but this is going to lead to the famous Long Patrol, where the 2nd Raider Battalion under Carlson was basically going to just follow these Japanese a long way across the island, just wrecking them all along the way. Now, after the Guadalcanal campaign, this area became a training ground and a camp for the 3rd Marine Division. One of the things that you'll hear often when talking about the Battle of Guadalcanal or jungle fighting in general is kunai grass. So I wanted to step aside here real quick and show just walking through some of this kunai grass. And as you can see, like, our visibility has been reduced to about 0 already. So just imagine having to fight in this stuff. I mean, yeah, I'm just getting smothered by this already. Now, also with us on this trip is author and historian Peter Williams, who interviewed over 100 Japanese veterans of World War II. And he has some pretty interesting insights on the fighting style of the Japanese, which seems completely crazy to most Americans and Westerners.
The typical Western veteran will tell you that he realized he might die in the war, but he really hoped to stay alive. The typical Japanese veteran will say that from the time he signed on, he expected to die in the war. In fact, one fellow told me that he was really surprised when the war ended and he was still alive, because that wasn't the plan. That doesn't mean that they rushed to death. I mean, Bushido, the way of the warrior, dictates that you should look for a purposeful place to die. So if you can take 5 of them with you, that's a purposeful death, and that's what you should do. Japanese officers, especially in 42, 43, told me that they thought they had good quality infantry, and they certainly didn't want to waste them in what we call a banzai charge. Their method of attack was similar to what you would see any regular army do.
We've moved back off of the beach just a little bit, and all around in this area is where the 3rd Marine Division would have been encamped when they were here on Guadalcanal. So Guadalcanal, after the campaign, became kind of a training and staging base for a lot of the American and Marine units that served in the Pacific. And something that is exceptionally cool about this place right here is that this was an amphibious tractor park, or Amtrak, and there are all kinds of Amtrak wrecks that are still here today. Now, to my understanding, there were originally somewhere in the vicinity of 90 of these that were just parked here after the war. These were some of the earlier models, possibly some of them used during the initial invasion of Guadalcanal. And then the 3rd Marine Division would have used these in training. So they would have been running these things all around this area and taking them out to sea and bringing them up on the beach. And then when the war ended, or when they got newer models, well, these just kind of became outdated. And now there's about 30 some odd that are around here amongst this village. Yeah, this is so cool. All right, so there you go. That was a little bit on the Battle of Koli Point, the wounding of Chesty Puller, and the Amtrak Park right here on the kind of eastern side of Guadalcanal. If you want to see more stuff like this, go check out Dave's channel, Guadalcanal Walking a Battlefield. He's exploring sites like this all the time and is really one of the best resources out there to learn more about the Battle of Guadalcanal.